else. You're probably, I hear someone. What are the odds of 3 classes a day and then there's no looking or laughing over work?
That would not work.
What have we got here?
I only gained 2 pounds.
Only gained 2?
Yeah, I'm still under 200.
Nice.
I thought I did 206 and I feel like
Just using some baby
I
wipes.
feel jiggly. I'm actually going to be doing what they eat all the food that I bought.
Yeah.
Do anti-inflammatory diets. And see how that
No meat, no dairy, no.
not total meat, like organic meat. I don't eat as much meat, like fish. Yeah, beef and stuff on the rack, a little bit poultry, more fish and poultry.
Yeah.
And all like the anti-inflammatory vegetables, like the antioxidants. I don't see how that does.
Yeah.
Curious about it.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Very close. Yeah. It will work for me. I can see. Try to. I think it's just too strict.
I just try to eat real. That's work well for me.
The only time I've lost like a good amount like the weight where I'm like under like I sit around like 14 to 16 like that. That's where I found.
All right, we can get started. Hope everybody's doing well. Sorry we had a little bit of technical difficulties there. I think we just had 2 Zooms trying to run at the same time, so that 5:30 class just ended, so we should be good to go. Today we're talking about fats. So we've done protein, we've done carbs. We're finishing off with our 3rd macronutrient today. Before we get into that though, just to review a little bit of last week, we were focusing on carbohydrates, and for some of us, that was just simply trying to switch out some better choices of carbs for some less ideal choices of carbs. So looking for complex carbs versus simple carbs. Does anyone have any experience that they gained this week? Any issues or anything they were proud of? Anything to do with last week's task? I would love to hear how it went for you guys. Anybody?
Yeah, I mostly just been carb tracking. I didn't really switch out any carbs that I've been having before, but everything, I don't know what I would switch out. There's nothing really left that's processed or
Okay. Awesome.
or whatever. But yeah, I've been getting the timing and some of the tracking dialed in a little better. It was a little bit of a hard switch when we started out. Once you made that timing schedule for me of when the meals should be, when I switched, like that right after that is when the gym's closed, and then I was working on a different time, and then I'm trying to like change my meals around to make it work. But this last week's been pretty dialed in that way.
Good. And feeling good during workouts and not super hungry.
Feel really good.
Okay, that's fantastic. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to hear that. Anybody else?
I swapped all my carbs out before, like at the start of this 90-day challenge.
Okay.
So this one was just a continuation of what I was doing before.
Awesome. So like what is like a day, what kind of carbs would you eat in your day, for example?
I've been trying to avoid a lot of like flour and sugar.
Okay.
So all those types of carbs, but I'm still eating like beans and apples and fruit and stuff like that. So
cool. And that's working well for you? Feeling pretty good?
Yeah, feeling good. Yeah, noticing a difference.
Great. Yay. Anybody else?
I threw in some rice crackers this week.
Nice. You said you threw in some rice crackers?
What's that? Yeah, just I don't know. Like same with me. I don't really. I don't eat bread, so
Okay.
like brown rice is an occasional thing, and
Okay.
I'm just trying to think like what. Yeah, I have. There's not a lot I would have had to change. I don't
Okay.
think. So
Nice. All right.
But-
Already been doing what you should be. That's awesome. Okay. We will get started. I will share my screen with you guys here. And we will talk about fats today. So these are the questions we're going to be answering, pretty similar to protein and carbs, but we're just focusing on a different macronutrient today. So, okay, talking about what are fats, kind of on like a biochemistry level. Again, these are an organic molecule made up of carbon and hydrogen elements, and they're joined together in groups, and we call these or refer to these as hydrocarbons. You've probably seen them like drawn out. I don't know if any of you took like chemistry in university, but basically, like, I didn't put any diagrams in here to confuse you guys, but with like little lines, and those indicate the different types of bonds that exist between the carbons and the hydrogens. We're going to get into that just a little bit. The arrangement and the interaction with each of these hydrocarbons and the molecules is what determines the type of fat. So you're probably familiar with hearing about like saturated fats, unsaturated fats, different types. And that's really just referring to like the chemistry, getting down to the nitty gritty, the way that they're arranged and the way that they interact amongst each other. So last week we talked about carbs, how we break those down, our body breaks those down into the simplest form that it can, which was monosaccharides. So similarly, we break down fats into fatty acids. That's the simplest unit of fat. Hold on one second here. Okay, continuing on. Hydrogen atoms bond to a hydrocarbon chain, and this is a process known as saturation. So that's where the saturated fats get their name from. The more hydrogens that are bonded to that hydrocarbon chain, the more saturated the fat is. If hydrogens are taking up all the available bonding sites on the chain, then this fat would be considered saturated. And that sort of chemical structure that we're talking about here is why saturated fats are usually solid or semi-solid at room temperature. So if you're thinking about like butter, for example, or like coconut oil, they're pretty solid at room temperature. That is why, because they're saturated fats. On the contrary, if only some of the hydrogens have bonded, the fat is called unsaturated. And these are usually liquid at room temperature, with the odd exception. So the less saturated fat is, the more fluid it is. You can think of like olive oil, different types of oils, those sorts of things. Those would be considered unsaturated fats. And these can be further subdivided into two different types. We've got our monounsaturated fatty acids, where only one carbon is unsaturated, so mono means one. And then we've got our polyunsaturated fatty acids, where we've got more than one carbon is unsaturated. And then you guys are probably familiar or have heard of omega-3s and omega-6s. These fatty acids are types of polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they're essential, meaning like when we talked about certain essential amino acids, these are fatty acids that our body doesn't produce. We have to obtain them through our diet. And they're super important. They have their own functions. I mentioned them in a little bit, but those are considered polyunsaturated fats. So 3 fatty acids can join together with a glycerol molecule, and those form what's called triglyceride. You've probably heard that word before, maybe, maybe not. But essentially, triglycerides are the major form of fat, and we're talking about dietary fat, so the fat we find in our diet, and then that's how our body stores fat. That's the storage form of fat within our body, triglycerides. So breaking down fats, again, we didn't really get into too much of this with the other macronutrients. We'll keep it the same way. It's not necessarily super important, but your body breaks down those triglycerides into fatty acids, that simplest form of fat, and a glycerol molecule. And then from there, they're repackaged before they enter your bloodstream and are taken throughout your body. It happens mostly in your small intestines. Just a couple of things to note. So last week when we were talking about carbs, we knew that the breakdown of carbs is really fast and our body is turning those turning our carbohydrates into monosaccharides really quickly, but fat is quite the opposite. So fat breakdown takes quite a while, and after we've eaten a lot of fat, it's not going to enter our bloodstream until several hours after. So when we're talking about digesting food, if we're eating a meal that has lots of fats, our body's going to take its time. It's not going to digest that food as quickly. So when we relate that to, say, working out, if we want to be able to use that food that we've just eaten, you're going to want to keep the fats a little bit lower around your training so that you're not digesting food and you're not lengthening that process and spreading it out. Rather having like higher carbohydrates and protein, you're going to be using that food a lot quicker. Fats just kind of slow down the process, which is good sometimes during the day, right? So maybe before bedtime, you want to digest that food a little bit slower. Then that's something you can consider. So dietary fat is super important. So some people might be scared just because it has the word fat in it, but fats don't necessarily make you fat, okay? So they're really important. If we didn't eat dietary fat, our body would really be in trouble because it does provide us with energy. So it's the most energy dense macronutrient, which means compared to protein and carbs, it has the most energy in terms of calories. It helps make and balance hormones, so super important, especially steroid hormones and sex hormones. So it's super important. Forms our cell membranes, which is really important for all cellular processes. Also helps with cell signaling. It's really important in that. It forms our brain and our nervous system, obviously super important. And then it transports certain vitamins. So those fat soluble vitamins, we talked about micronutrients and all those vitamins and minerals back when we talked about vegetables. So vitamins A, D, E, and K, those need to be transported, and fats are responsible for doing that. And it gives us certain fatty acids that we can't synthesize on our own. As mentioned, those omega-3s and omega-6s, we do need to get those through dietary fat. Our body just cannot make those. Talking a little bit now, so about saturated fats, talk a little bit about unsaturated fats. Just to review, so these are the ones that are where the hydrocarbon chains are filled with those hydrogens. So they're stable and they're solid at room temperature, okay? Sources of saturated fats are going to be like any sort of animal protein is going to have, so like beef, pork, lamb, these all contain fats, and the fat that is contained within those foods is generally saturated fat. Eggs, full fat dairy, so butter, for example, cheese as well, coconut and cocoa, chocolate, dark chocolate is good. I'm going to touch on cholesterol. Okay, so lots of times saturated fats kind of have a bad reputation, and they're kind of perceived as the type of fat that causes heart disease and raising cholesterol. So just to give you a little bit of background on what cholesterol is and how that relates to dietary fat, our liver produces cholesterol naturally, no matter what. So as long as you have a liver, you are producing cholesterol, and it is really important. It has a few functions. It's not all bad. We actually do need it, and we are producing it no matter what. It produces vitamin D. Again, it's really important with maintaining and producing steroid hormones and cell membranes, so very similar to fats that we were talking about before. So where kind of cholesterol comes in, we're talking about diet and in your bloodstream, cholesterol is very fatty, so it's not going to mix well with blood. And therefore, to get around in our body, it needs, like, you can think about it as like a wrapper, so a protein wrapper. These are called lipoproteins, and that's what coats the cholesterol and transports it throughout our body. There's two different types of cholesterol you guys may or may not have heard of, HDL and LDL. HDL stands for high density lipoproteins, and these are essentially like the wrappers that transport cholesterol throughout our body. So HDL is commonly like referred to as good cholesterol. It basically cleans up any excess cholesterol that's kind of hanging around and brings it to liver to be disposed of. And that's why it's kind of called the good cholesterol, because it's like doing some cleanup, getting rid of extra cholesterol that we don't need. And LDL, or low density lipoproteins, sometimes this is what you would call like your bad cholesterol, is transporting cholesterol and fat from the liver to the rest of the body. And that's part of the reason why it's it doesn't have the best reputation, because it's the main ingredient in like blood vessel plaque buildup. So we're talking about like arteries and clogging your arteries. It's often LDL that's responsible for that, and that is just based on its function and the fact that it's transporting cholesterol through the body. So when it's, you know, getting deposited on those blood vessels, it's just because, unfortunately, part of doing its job. So it is definitely linked to heart trouble. And there's an association between elevated cholesterol and premature death, or just cardiovascular disease in general. So you do want to be mindful of cholesterol, but not all of it is bad. So just a few notes on like how you can apply this to yourself and what you can do to maintain healthy levels of cholesterol. Because like we said, it's super important. We do need it, and we produce some of it just as is. We want to keep those levels within control. And of course, this is just more speaking in general terms. If you have specific cholesterol issues, then your doctor might have told you to do other things, and that's totally, listen to your doctor. This is just in general terms. Staying lean, like maintaining a healthy body weight, is going to be really important. So usually the higher body fat percentage that you have, the increased cholesterol. It kind of has a direct relationship there. Eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, which sounds like all you guys are doing, because we've touched on that, and you guys seem to be doing a great job of eating veggies and fruits. These have cholesterol lowering properties. Eating unprocessed whole grains are great, because again, it's just reducing that plaque buildup. Eating legumes, which are rich in fiber, just as fruit and veggies are. So basically eating a diet that's centered around whole, unprocessed food is going to be really good. Exercising, which you guys also are great at, that helps boost your LDL, or your good cholesterol, the cholesterol that's like cleaning up. So that kind of covers cholesterol. I wanted to touch on that when we talk about fats. So saturated fats aren't bad. We're going to talk about what kind of fats you should strive for when you're eating, just in general terms. But those, just to talk about cholesterol, because that's something that comes up a lot with fat. It's like, oh, if you eat too much fat, it's not going to be good for cholesterol, but it's all about a fine balance, and you shouldn't be saying absolutely no to dietary fat, because it's super important. I will talk about trans fats a little bit. So these are kind of known as the bad fats. They get their name from their chemical configuration. So they have a double bond. It's not super important for you guys. Doesn't really matter, but that's just like the detailed chemistry of it. But basically, trans fats come from industrial processing. So they're not natural. Most trans fats are not naturally occurring, which means that we are making this artificially, and that's why it's not great for you. So if you've heard of hydrogenation or hydrogenated oils, that's a process that takes an unsaturated fat and turns it into a trans fat. But it's not natural. So talking about super high processed foods, this is the process that's going on, and these are the types of fat, the trans fat that you find within them. And these are types of fats that we do pretty much want to avoid, because they're not natural. It's an artificial process, and if we eat a balanced diet of whole foods, we'll be getting the fats that we need, and we don't need trans fat. Talking about those omega-3, omega-6s. So these are essential fatty acids. I mentioned earlier, we have to get them through our diet. Otherwise, our body's not going to make them. We get these through plant sources and through marine sources. So fish and fish oils. So if you've heard of taking fish oil supplements, some people have been like prescribed by a doctor or recommended that they do take those. And that's one source of these. And then eating like chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, those types of different seeds, walnuts as well, are going to be sources of both omega-3s and omega-6s. Omega-3s, these are an anti-inflammatory fatty acid. So think about any process that's like reducing inflammation in your body. So dilating blood vessels, lowering inflammation overall, decreasing pain. Obviously, those are super important functions, and those omega-3s are responsible. And then on the contrary, omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. So they constrict blood vessels, they cause blood clotting. So that's an important process, obviously. Otherwise, if you cut yourself, for example, you would just bleed out. So we do need blood clotting, and omega-6s are responsible for that. And then increased pain, which sometimes is important because pain is an indicator that something needs attention in the body. It's letting you know. So kind of putting those little details together, we're talking about sort of like big picture ideas on different types of fats that we covered. As humans, over time, we've evolved to eat a varied diet, and that is mainly because we ate like a long time ago seasonally. Whatever was in season is what we ate. So we thrive on a variety of different types of fats, as long as they're occurring naturally in foods and they're not processed or not trans fat, then pretty much we're good to go. So we're aiming for balance across all different types because that's just how we evolved to eat. Again, you're striving for a relatively balanced mix of fat types, so a mix of saturated fat and then unsaturated fat, both mono and polyunsaturated. And this balance is just going to occur naturally if we're choosing a wide selection of diverse, whole, minimally processed foods. It's going to have our bases covered if that's how we're eating. And then avoiding or minimizing as much as possible those industrially processed fats, those trans fats and artificially hydrogenated fats. This is just a nice little summary. If I can move this. So saturated fats are going to be your animal fats coming from basically any kind of animal product or animal meat. Your tropical oils like coconut oils, chocolate, cocoa. Then you have your monounsaturated, so olive oils, avocados, nuts, all the different types of nuts. And then polyunsaturated were those omega-3s and omega-6s. And that's going to come from flax, also like chia seeds, hemp seeds, fish oils, and then omega-6s are your different types of seed oils like canola oil, sunflower oil. Sometimes those get a bad reputation as well, but as long as you're looking for just 100% pure, pure oil, they're not hydrogenating it and putting it through that artificial process. Those are the ones that you want to avoid. So some more big picture ideas here, and we're talking about fats. You want to eat relatively unprocessed fats from whole foods, so avoiding those highly processed. Again, just reiterating because that's pretty much the most important points here. You want to seek variety and balance of all fat types, so you don't need to cut one of them out or avoid. Just getting a variety is going to be your best bet here. Again, just kind of reviewing fat breakdown. It's a long process, takes a long time, several hours. Fat's also really important because it helps us feel full and it's satiating. It's usually like fats add like a sense of savory to our meals, so they keep us satiated, enjoying our meals, and keeping us full between meals, which is a bonus. Again, if you want to kind of be a little more specific around our workouts, if you keep the fats a little bit lower so that your body can use those nutrients right before and right after you're working out, that's awesome. And then kind of, as you get further away from your workouts, if you have higher fat meals, that's going to be beneficial for keeping you full and slowing down that digestion process. And they're super important. So we don't want to be eliminating fats completely from our diet because they have very important roles that are not filled by anything else really. Like we mentioned, hormone production and regulating hormones and brain development, nervous system, cell signaling, all those really important things that we only get from fats. And then we have to be sure that we're consuming our certain fatty acids of omega-3s and omega-6s through our diets because our body is not going to synthesize them. Those are essential fatty acids. So dietary fats, even healthy fats, they are high calorie. So I didn't give this information for carbs and protein. We're going to talk a little bit more about it as we talk about like balancing all 3 macronutrients in the weeks to come and kind of having some more specific goals to aim for. But protein and carbs, just to give you an idea, are about 4 calories per gram. So a gram of protein is around 4 calories. Same with carbs. Gram of carb is about 4 calories. Fats, on the other hand, are 9 calories per gram. So a gram of fat is just over double what proteins and carbs are. So they're very energy dense, which is just something to be mindful of. Because if we're eating an abundance and we're eating too much, we have excess fat in our diet, and we're structuring our diet like mainly around fats, but also not really being mindful of all the other things that we're eating, then it's going to lead to weight gain, which is like any excess calories in our body is going to lead to weight gain. But the reason we have to be a little mindful with fats is that they are really energy dense at 9 calories per gram. There's also going to be some like individuality here. So some people really tolerate a higher fat diet as opposed to a higher carb diet. And it just comes down to like your body type and genetic factors as well, and just kind of getting used to what works better and what works for you. So I'll talk right away here about like a basic kind of starting point for looking at how much fat you should be eating. Whoops, that's in the wrong order. So in general, females could aim for about 1 serving of fat per meal, and males about 1.5 to 2 servings per meal, give or take a little bit based on like your exercise levels and whether you're eating a higher fat diet or a higher carb diet, if you're just kind of eating a very balanced diet, which is ideal. If we're gonna look at like a serving, it's gonna be a little bit bigger than the size of your thumb. So if you put that on your plate, it's going to be about like a tablespoon of peanut butter, for example, a very small handful of nuts. If you're eating like a protein serving for a meal, that's going to contain about a serving of fat there. About 1/2 tablespoon of any type of oil is going to be about 7.5 grams of fat, and that's about what we're going for 1 serving. So as you can see, like a tablespoon of nut butter, I honestly encourage you guys, if you have a tablespoon at home, or even if you have like a food scale, to measure out that 15 grams or 1 tablespoon of nut butter and just to see what it looks like. It's pretty eye-opening sometimes to see that what we think a serving of fat is a lot more than what it actually is. And that's just one place that we can be conscious of if we're talking about losing weight, which lots of us, that's our goal, is to lose weight. Because although their fats are very important, they're, if you're eating an abundance of fat, that's over double the calories of eating, too much protein, for example. So fats are often can be the culprit. They kind of sneak up on you and add up just because we're not aware of how much we're actually eating. So a good starting point, if you're someone that knows like how many calories you're eating in the day, which we haven't specifically touched on, which is fine. We're going to get into some of that in the weeks to come. But if you're someone that already tracks your food, or you know how many calories you eat, about 30% of your daily calories coming from fat is a pretty good, pretty average starting point. So I just kind of gave an example here. If you eat 2,000 calories a day, 30% of 2,000 is 600 calories. And then we divided 600 by 9 because there's 9 calories per gram of fat. And that gives us 67 grams of fat. So if you were I'm not expecting all of you to do this math, and you might not even know how many calories you're eating a day, and that's totally fine. We're going to talk about that, like I said, in the weeks to come. But if you're just curious, we're going to keep track of our fats a little bit this week and just kind of see where we're at and get an idea of if we're like way above that, or if we're maybe kind of on par with about 30% of our calories coming from fats. That's just a general idea, but for lots of people, that's a good starting place if they were going to be working on macronutrient breakdown. So this week, super simple. I also attached in the Google Drive a list of different sources of fats, and then I put a little S beside the ones that are saturated fats. And then if they don't have a letter beside them, those are all unsaturated fats. And you want to be making sure that we're going for variety here. So try and see if you can hit saturated and unsaturated fats. And then within that, knowing that you've got your polyunsaturated and your monounsaturated fats, and just trying to eat a variety and get all of those different types in. So eating nuts and seeds if you can, eating different types of oils, getting some animal protein in there as well, coconut oils, avocados, and getting that variety. So you're not just eating one type. And then you're going to just write down. So for some of us, depending on where you're at, if you want to get a little more detailed with this, keep track of the actual amount of fat you're eating. So if you can, write down the grams of fat that you're eating. So if you have like 2 tablespoons of peanut butter and some oatmeal for breakfast, that's going to be like 15 grams of fat, for example. If you don't, then you're just going to be writing down what you're eating at each meal, where your fat is coming from. So whether it's cheese or whether it's whatever it might be, avocado or eggs. And if you're curious, look up the nutrition facts for what you're eating, have a rough idea of how much it is, and then see if you can put those grams of fat beside what you're eating and get a little total for the day just to see where you're at. It'll be helpful in the upcoming weeks when we start looking at maybe a little bit more specifics for some people on how much they should be eating. So if you're up for it, keep track of it and you can do the math. Otherwise, just very simply just writing down and being aware of where your fats are coming from, and then just striving for variety and making sure that we are getting dietary fats throughout the day. Sound good? That is going to be all that we're going to talk about for fats today. So if anyone has any questions, those 2 documents will be in the Google Drive. I think I already put them there, so you guys can print those out, keep track of those things. And yeah, again, if you know how many calories you eat in a day or how many you're trying to eat, just based on other calculations that you've done, then see what about 30% of your daily calories is. Aim for that many grams. Do the little math there. So you're going to have to do 30% times however many calories it is. I don't know if any of you wrote that down if you're curious. And then you're going to be dividing that by 9 because there's 9 calories per gram of fat. And that'll give you the grams per day that you're going to try and aim for, or just to compare to see where you're at now and see how much work you have to do. Sound okay? Okay, does anybody have any questions? Kind of blitzed through that, didn't stop for any questions, but feel free to also interrupt me throughout that. No, everybody's feeling good, ready to be mindful of the fats that we're getting. Cool. Did anybody do any of the Zoom workouts this week?
I did not do any of the Zoom workouts this week.
Or got some workouts of your own in, I assume?
Yeah, I've been doing lots with the barbell since that's what I have here right now, so got to take advantage of it.
Yeah, why not? Absolutely. Anybody else get some workouts in this week?
I did the Zoom yesterday and did it today.
Nice.
We had a private lunch class with Paul today. It was lovely. I like it. It's different. It's, I mean, even if I do that a few times a week, it's just gonna, I think, keep me more on track than I am able to do on my own.
Awesome. That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Good for you. Anybody else? Making sure we're getting those workouts in? Yeah. Okay, well, nobody else has any other questions or comments. Again, I got a couple emails this week from just a few people about their just kind of journey so far and sending me some of their documents. So it was super helpful. I was able to kind of look at them, give them a little bit more direction and kind of pinpoint some areas that are really good and that they should keep working on. So again, you can definitely email me, Ali@starkstrength.com, or you can send me a text message if you have my number. And if you don't, email me and I'm happy to give that because I respond a little quicker to text than to emails. But keep it up, guys, and keep getting those workouts in. We'll focus on fats this week, and next week we're moving on to something different.
Hey, Ali, do you know if it's possible to share like the tracking from FitnessPal?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Shoot me a text with your username for MyFitnessPal, and then I can add you as a friend and I can look over your stuff.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
I'll do that.
Yeah, if anybody else uses MyFitnessPal, for example, if you just send me your username, then I can add you, we can add each other as friends, and I can also look over that as well. That's super easy to do if you're already doing that. Good question. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that then.
Yeah, I have one question. Do we have access to our information from when we first started, when Coach Kraus did our
Your intakes?
intake stuff?
Yeah, so that's a good question as to where that paperwork is. I'm gonna assume it's at the gym. So is Paul on here? I don't know if Paul's on here.
Yeah, we do have all the info here. So if you're wanting any of that, I can like email it to you.
That'd be great.
Yeah, do a little comparison, see where we're at. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Okay, cool.
Cool, we can do that. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, tuning in. We'll be here again next
Hi,
week.
Ryan.
Tuesday, 6:30. And again, if that link doesn't work, it's probably just because we're finishing up class. So just be patient, keep trying, and you should be able to get on there.
Can we do 6:40 just in case? Because if there's any overlap, then So
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you.
6:40 Tuesday.
40.
Okay.
Yes.
40.
Okay.
Thanks, Allie.
Okay. See you guys.
Thanks, Allie.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allie.